I dated the tall, dark, handsome with hair in the past, and he ended up being a cheat. Now, I'm not saying that all tall, dark, and handsome guys are cheats. Thank you for this video. I think some of us women struggle with perfectionism in the choice of a partner. How did you get around deciding that your husband was a good choice, irrespective of being more spiritually mature, I assume? I think it's a real struggle for women. So that was a comment from this video where I shared a few red flags that I noticed in Muyiwa before we got married. You should check it out if you haven't already. Now, I think this is a really great question because the answer to it is actually one of the reasons why a lot of women and men are still single. And I'll explain what I mean, but first let me tell you a quick story. So a few years ago, I ran out of tissues at my desk in the office. So I checked the cupboard where we typically keep the box of tissues and I didn't find any. And at the time, I knew that the office manager used to keep a stack of boxes on the shelf by her desk. So I went to the shelf by her desk, checked, and I didn't see the box of tissues. So I asked her if we had any boxes of tissues anywhere. And she asked if I had checked the usual places. And I said, yeah. She said, oh, okay, that if I didn't find, then we don't have. So she's going to place a quick order for us to receive some tissue. So I turned around to leave. And then maybe in 10 seconds, I heard her call my name. So I sort of like turned around like, okay, yeah, what's up? And then she pointed to a box of tissues by the shelf that I had just checked. Now, the thing is, previously she had been buying a small yellow box of tissues. So when I said that I was looking for tissues, I was looking for a small yellow box of tissues. However, the box of tissues that she had pointed out to me were blue and they were larger than the box of tissues that she typically bought. Now, I was looking out for a box of tissues, but what my mind was actually focused on in the search for tissues was a small yellow box. And because I didn't see that small yellow box, I assumed that we didn't have tissues. However, there was a bigger box available, but because it wasn't small and yellow, I didn't notice it. Now, I guess what I'm trying to say is that sometimes because we're so focused on what we think we want, we're blinded to the what we need that God is trying to present to us. Most times we miss things because we're more focused on how we assume those things should be or look, instead of how they really are and how they really look. Let me explain. So one very common complaint that I get from a lot of ladies that have been waiting for a while is that they're told that their standards are too high, so they should reduce their standards a bit. And when I dig a little bit deeper, I realize that their standards are actually not too high. And that the reason that they're actually still single might be because their standards are actually not high enough. And it's actually their preferences that are either unrealistic or not beneficial to them or where God is trying to take them. So I'll explain, but first we need to understand the difference between standards and preferences. So a standard is a minimum level of quality. So think of it as the barest minimum, something that is generally used as a basis for decision making. So think must have or deal breaker. And it's something that should be rooted in morals and values. In essence, it's something that should actually be rooted in scripture. On the other hand, a preference is simply a liking of one thing over another. So you prefer A to B. Think of it as the negotiable icing on the cake. Keyword being negotiable. So preferences often involve superficial things like physical appearance, lifestyle choices, or personal traits, personal habits, hobbies, that sort of thing. So if your list includes things like minimum age, nationality, net worth, I'm sorry to let you know that those aren't standards. They're actually preferences. Now, while these things can enhance attraction and like the initial connection, they don't necessarily or actually contribute to the success of a relationship. Now, because preferences are actually based on our personal biases, they actually run the risk of not being aligned with what we actually need. So they're more aligned with what we want. In other words, preferences have to do with our internal beliefs on how others should look or act, or what we think we deserve, and actually has nothing to do with the quality of the other person's character. So now, with regards to the initial concern, these ladies' standards aren't high enough because their preferences consistently supersede them when it comes to the sort of person that they want to be with. Now, just because somebody ticks off all boxes on your preferences list doesn't mean that they will meet your standards. So even meeting the highest preference level means absolutely nothing if they don't meet the baseline standard of quality. And like we said, this is because preferences don't actually align with our needs. So while someone may initially catch our attention, or there's like an initial spark, it really means nothing if the minimum level of quality is not met. Now, why am I saying all this? It's because one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people mix up standards and preferences. So they make what should be a standard a preference, and they make what should be a preference a standard. Now, understanding the difference between both and accurately characterizing both will prevent you from compromising essential qualities that are necessary for the success of your relationship. Now, one major reason for the mix-up of the two is that preferences are actually descriptive examples of standards, which is why it's sort of like easy to mix them up or mistake them for a standard. So for example, you might want somebody that is financially secure, and one example amongst other things of someone that is financially secure is somebody that might be a high earner. So instead of setting the standard as financial security, which entails a whole bunch of other things, the person might set the standard as someone that is a high earner, if that makes any sense. Now, the danger here is that if you mistakenly treat a preference as a standard, it's very possible or very likely that you might end up rejecting God's best for you, because this person then doesn't look like the image that you've created for yourself in your head. And if you compromise on a standard thinking that is just a preference, you may find yourself stuck in a problematic relationship that doesn't meet your core needs. Now, a lot of people have an image in their head of what they want or what they think they want, and it's preventing them from receiving what God actually has for them. Most of you know my story, which Muyiwa shared here or somewhere. And in it, he talks about how I wasn't physically his spec when God highlighted to him that I was his wife. Now, most people wonder how I managed to navigate that situation. Entering into a relationship with a man whose physical specifications I didn't initially meet in the beginning. Aside from being secure in my identity in Christ, which I discuss here or somewhere, a very important standard for me was someone who not only heard from God, but obeyed God. So for me, Muyiwa exhibiting that quality trumped any hurt or upset or ego bruising that initial feeling of rejection might have brought. But I know that we're all spirit-filled, tongue-speaking, fire-breathing, Jesus folk all up in here. So we don't have a physical spec. We have our minds focused on the things of the spirits, so that we will not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. So I know you want a spirit-filled man, a high priest of your home that can take charge of the spiritual atmosphere. So I have come again to deliver you from the spirits of spiritual specifications. I'm sorry to break it to you, but the head of the prayer team, someone that prays 3 times a day for 3 hours at a time, is not a standard. It's a preference. Someone that kabashes non-stop, that when he speaks in tongue, the house shakes. It's not a standard. It's a preference. I know what you want, but in all these things, your standard should actually be someone that has a tangible relationship with God that is bearing fruit. somebody that not only hears from God, but obeys God. What is the essence of praying for hours and hours if there is no fruit of a changed life? Now, I'm not saying to discard preferences altogether. They do have their place. They're important in shaping the unique aspects of relationships. They can make relationships somewhat exciting. Now, it's important to remember that people, and by people, I mean both you and him, grow and evolve over time. So your preferences by nature are subject to change. Standards, on the other hand, do not and should not change. So over time, your partner might closely grow to match your preferences, or your preferences can actually change to accommodate your partner if you allow God to renew your mind. I'll tell you a story. So a few years ago, I say a few years ago, or maybe 10 years ago now, my favorite breakfast was waffles, smoked ham, and frankfurters. So what I would do is I would cut up the waffles into like bite-sized pieces, cut up the frankfurters, cut up the ham, the pieces of ham, and then drizzle it with syrup. Fantastic. Really, really love that breakfast. And I remember we were still in Nigeria at this time, and I had traveled to the UK. So I brought all these things back, and Muyiwa came to the house the day after I got back to see me. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, I was really excited. I brought all these things back, and I made myself some breakfast. So he had come over and I offered him some as well. I was really excited to share it with him because I was like, this is my favorite breakfast. I'm going to share it with him. And his reaction was not what I expected. In fact, his reaction was very, very disappointing. He didn't like it. And at the back of my mind, I'm like, oh my God. And then the devil actually started putting a lot of thoughts in my head because I enjoy cooking. And the funny thing is, I enjoy cooking for other people, not necessarily myself. So I was very excited about that meal. I was very excited about sharing it with him, but he didn't give me the response that I expected. And I enjoy cooking a certain type of food. So when he didn't like it, my mind was like, is this guy going to sort of like the type of things that I make and all those things? And it was it might sound trivial, but back in the day it was a big deal for me because to a certain extent, I had tied my identity to the fact that I love cooking a certain type of meal for people. So his reaction was sort of like challenging that identity, but I won't get so much into that. Now, this is over 10 years later. That's not my favorite meal anymore. I can't even remember the last time that I ate it. And now Muyiwa likes food like that, right? So imagine if over 10 years ago, I had made the decision that, okay, this person doesn't like this type of food that I like. He doesn't enjoy eating this sort of food that I enjoy making. Imagine if I had put those things as standards that, oh, the person that I'm with has to enjoy X, Y, Z, or whatever standard I wanted to create out of that. I would have missed out on a really great guy for something that's really, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't mean anything. Which is why it's really important to be flexible with our preferences, because being flexible allows room for growth and for change, both in yourself and in your partner. Muyiwa is definitely not the same man that I married almost 9 years ago now. He has grown and matured so much in his faith. And that gets to be my testimony, not someone else's, because I allowed Holy Spirit to help me believe God. When God said that this was my husband, even though he didn't necessarily look like the type of man that I thought I would marry. Being flexible with preferences helps us to focus on those things that really matter, those things that will ultimately contribute to the success of our relationships, to the success of our marriage. Having that perspective of flexibility will help you prioritize long-term suitability over your short-term desires. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that being flexible with your preferences encourages you to be open-minded and to consider somebody that might not have initially fit the picture of preferences that you had, but is someone that is actually suitable for you because he meets those standards that you should have. Now, I can hear you. I can hear your thoughts. I can hear you saying, but won't lowering my preferences mean that I'm settling? Now, lowering your preferences isn't settling. It's simply adopting more realistic expectations. It's lowering your standards that would be settling, which is why it's really important to know the difference between a preference and a standard. Now, ask yourself, do you really want someone that is older than you, or do you simply want someone that is mature? Because there are some old papas out there that my 7-year-old is more mature than. Do you really want someone that is tall, dark, handsome, or light-skinned with blue eyes, or whatever your physical specification is? Or do you want someone that you're attracted to, or someone that you find attractive if you let God work on your heart? Do you really want someone that earns 6 or 7 figures, or are you looking for someone who is financially stable and a good steward of finances? I'm sure you get what I mean. So what if you find someone who earns the 6 figures or who earns the 7 figures, but the person isn't a good steward of his finances? You would have been better off with someone who doesn't earn 6 figures or 7 figures, but is a better steward of finances, if you get what I mean with this preference and standard thing now. So just like with boundaries, which I discussed here or somewhere, your standards should be decided upon before you enter into a relationship, and not as a response to your potential suitor where you're setting up standards to fit them, to accommodate them. So one thing that I see is ladies that modify their standards or create standards to accommodate somebody because they like the person already. See, don't let his looks distract you from the fact that he cannot keep his word. Or don't let his bank accounts distract you from the fact that he lacks self-control. People encounter lots of problems when they allow their preferences be the main influence or deciding factor when they choose a partner. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is never lower your standards to accommodate someone whose preferences you like, but lacks what is necessary to meet your standards. Now, I know a lot of you are scared that God will not give you somebody that you're attracted to. He's going to give you this uber spiritual guy that you're not really attracted to. But I want you to bear in mind that God is not a wicked God. He's not out to get you. He's not out to frustrate you. God is actually more interested in the success of your marriage than you are. And all he's saying is, trust me, trust me, trust me. Just focus on the qualities that will make your marriage a success. Focus on those qualities that will allow the purpose that I have for your marriage to be fulfilled. As difficult as it might be for you to hear, preferences are tempting because they are based on fulfilling the lusts of the eyes and the desires of the flesh. And they're often based on our past instead of our future. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and get yourself an unattractive broke guy. However, I am evidence that you'd be surprised what you would find attractive, or rather who you would find attractive, if you allow God to actually renew your mind, to renew your preferences, to renew your desires, to renew your wants. Now ask yourself how being with people who met all your preferences but not your standards has worked out for you so far. Now, if you're currently in a relationship, think about what is making the relationship work. Is it his height? Is it the color of his eyes? Is it the fact that he has a master's degree? Or is it those standards that really matters that have contributed to the success and the health of the relationship? My husband had a preference for slim, light-skinned, mixed race chicas. But God said, no, Ugale is the one for you. I, on the other hand, never envisioned that I would marry someone who looked like my husband. or even someone who likes some of the things that he likes. I didn't have a strict preference per se, not the way that he did, but I wouldn't have minded someone taller who had a bit more hair. But at the end of the day, how does height and hair contribute to the success of a marriage? Now, when I think of the things that I really need in a husband, Muyiwa ticks those boxes. I dated the tall, dark, handsome with hair in the past, and he ended up being a cheat. Now, I'm not saying that all tall, dark, and handsome guys are cheats, but that we had to move our preferences out of the way so that we could be open to receive the love that God had for us. Now, if you are ready to receive God's best, I encourage you to be open to someone who shows evidence of meeting your standards, even if they don't match all your preferences. But first, you have to decide what those standards are. If you will need a bit of help with that, be sure to sign up for the waiting list to join the Revealed Bride community. So to answer the original question, while I might have had a preference for somebody who I perceived to be more spiritually mature than myself, it was more important to have somebody that was maturing, because spiritual maturity isn't a destination, it's a process. And I'll see you in the next one.